The forbidden intelligence trick Machiavelli used to gain power. If you've ever wondered why the most powerful people in history often seem to operate by a different set of rules, and why they make moves most of us wouldn't dare, why they seem to see 10 steps ahead while others are stuck reacting, you're about to discover the root of that mystery. This is not just a story about Machiavelli. This is a revelation about how intelligence, when applied in a very specific, forbidden way, becomes not just sharp but weaponized. It's the kind of intelligence that doesn't just solve problems. It creates opportunities where others see obstacles. It bends perception. It sculpts reality. And it makes people follow you, even when they don't know why. That is what Niccolò Machiavelli understood better than almost anyone who has ever written about human nature, politics, and power. But before we go deeper, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like the smartest people aren't always the most successful? That brilliance alone doesn't guarantee influence, wealth, or leadership. That's not an accident, it's a warning. Intelligence is only potential. What matters is how you apply it. And Machiavelli's brilliance wasn't in his IQ, it was in how ruthlessly and precisely he used his intellect to understand the true rules of the game. Not the rules people claim to follow. The rules they actually follow when no one's watching. In his infamous book, The Prince, Machiavelli shattered the illusion that power is earned just through virtue, kindness, or justice. He revealed something uncomfortable, that people are rarely moved by morality and more often by fear, self-interest, and perception. And if you can understand those forces, not just judge them, you can start to influence them. Here's what makes Machiavelli's intelligence trick so forbidden. It begins with accepting reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. That sounds simple, but it's not. Most of us are trapped in illusions, ethical ideals, social norms, cultural scripts. But we want the world to be fair, so we act as though it is. We want people to be good, so we assume they are. We think honesty is always rewarded, so we cling to it, even when it weakens us. Machiavelli saw through all of that. He didn't reject morality. He simply refused to let it blind him.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
His trick, his forbidden insight was this: to separate the appearance of virtue from the use of virtue. That is, to understand that in the game of power, what people believe you are matters more than what you actually are. And if you can control what they see, you can control what they do. This is not deception in the cartoonish sense. It's psychological precision. It's the mastery of narrative, timing, and perception. Imagine a chessboard where every piece you move isn't just a tactical decision, it's a signal to everyone watching. A symbol. A manipulation of belief. That's how Machiavelli thought, and that's how power actually works. So here's the deep question. Are you willing to see the world clearly, even if what you see makes you uncomfortable? Because the moment you do, you step into a different realm of intelligence. A realm where you stop reacting to what people say and start decoding what they actually mean. Where you stop playing the game everyone else is playing and start shaping the game itself. Machiavelli's intelligence wasn't about coldness, but it was about clarity. He saw that people are driven by fear more than love, by gain more than fairness, by survival more than principle. And instead of pretending otherwise, he built strategies that used those forces. That's why his ideas were feared. That's why The Prince was banned, burned, and condemned. because it didn't just reveal a philosophy, it revealed a toolkit. And in the wrong hands, that toolkit could be terrifyingly effective. But here's the twist. In your hands, that toolkit doesn't have to be evil. It can be transformative, because Machiavelli never said, be cruel. He said, understand when cruelty works and when it backfires. He never said, lie always. He said, know when truth serves you and when it exposes you. But his intelligence trick is not about becoming a monster, but it's about being honest with yourself about how the world works and then playing wisely within it. So let's make this personal. Think of a time when you were too honest, too trusting, too transparent, and it cost you. It didn't feel fair, did it? But Machiavelli would say that's because you were playing by the rules you were taught, not the rules that actually govern human behavior. The forbidden trick is to learn those hidden rules without losing your soul, to wield intelligence like a blade not to wound, but to carve a path through chaos. And now I'm going to ask you something you won't hear in school, on social media, or from polite society. What would you be capable of if you stopped pretending people are more noble than they are? What if you stopped hoping for fairness and started building leverage? What if you stopped seeking approval and started shaping perception? Would you be more dangerous or just more free? This is the uncomfortable edge where Machiavelli lives. And in the next part, we're going to unpack exactly how he did it step by step. We'll reveal the psychology he used to read people like open books, the principles he followed to stay ahead of rivals, and the tactics he employed to make power flow toward him. The power mirror, how Machiavelli turned human nature into his greatest weapon. If the first part of Machiavelli's intelligence trick was brutal honesty about reality, the second part was even more dangerous, using human nature as a mirror. Not to reflect himself, but to reflect others back at themselves. This is where it gets uncomfortable, because most of us are taught to treat people as they should be. Machiavelli treated people as they are. And that difference between idealism and realism is where his true genius lived. Let's break this down. Human nature is predictable. People want to be loved, to be safe, to feel important, to avoid pain. They want to believe they're good. They want to belong. They fear being abandoned. They're drawn to confidence, but repelled by arrogance. They'll follow strength, but only if it's cloaked in charisma. Most importantly, they will lie to themselves to maintain their illusions. But Machiavelli didn't condemn any of this. He studied it with clinical precision. And he realized something that most philosophers ignored. If you understand the patterns of human nature, but you can build power structures that never have to force people. They'll choose what you want them to choose. This is the intelligence trick few dare to use. It's not about manipulation in the crude sense, it's about alignment. Machiavelli would walk into a room and intuit exactly what each person feared, admired, and desired. Then he would position himself accordingly, but not necessarily as their enemy, not even as their friend, but as the answer to what they were already looking for. That's how power moves without resistance. That's how influence becomes effortless. Because people don't feel coerced, they feel understood. Ask yourself, how often do you listen just long enough to respond, but not long enough to see someone? Machiavelli listened like a predator, not to respond, but to read. And what he read wasn't words, it was weakness. Not to exploit, but to anticipate, to prepare, to position himself where others would naturally turn when things fell apart. That's the power of the mirror. When you reflect people's inner world better than they understand it themselves, they will follow you even if they don't trust you. Because the mind craves clarity. And Machiavelli offered it. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people are not driven by logic. They're driven by fear, emotion, ego, and comfort. When you speak to those forces, not manipulate them, but recognize them, you begin to wield a different kind of intelligence. One that's not about being right, but about being effective. That's the shift Machiavelli made. He stopped trying to win moral debates. He started trying to win people. And the way he did it, through calculated appearances. He understood that truth means very little if no one believes it. That being right isn't enough, you have to be perceived as right. That's why he advised leaders to appear virtuous, even if they weren't. Not because he hated virtue, but because he knew that perception is the currency of power. People don't follow reality, they follow symbols, appearances, archetypes. And if you can master those, you can move entire crowds without ever raising your voice. But let's go deeper. Why is this so effective? Because most people are looking for certainty in an uncertain world, and Machiavelli gave it to them. He positioned himself as the one who knew how things really worked, the one who could protect them from chaos, and the one who understood the game. And in a world full of confusion, that kind of clarity becomes magnetic. People stop questioning your decisions. They start deferring to your judgment. Not because they're weak, but because you've become their mirror. You reflect back the confidence, vision, and decisiveness they wish they had. But here's the warning. This power only works if it's backed by real understanding. If you fake it, people eventually see through you. Machiavelli wasn't just a manipulator, he was a master observer of human nature. That's what made his insights so dangerous. He didn't need to lie. He simply understood people better than they understood themselves. And once you reach that level of insight, you don't chase power. It gravitates to you. So now the question becomes, are you willing to see people not just as friends or enemies, but as patterns? Can you separate what they say from what they mean? Can you listen not with your ears, but with your insight? Because once you do, you'll begin to notice what Machiavelli noticed, that the path to power isn't about domination. It's about positioning, and the one who can mirror human nature with the most clarity wins. The cloak and the blade. Why morality alone will never win you power. There's a comforting lie we're all told growing up, that if you're good, if you're honest, and if you always do the right thing, life will reward you. But that power will come to you, respect will be earned, and justice will prevail. But Machiavelli saw through that illusion. He didn't just disagree with it, he dissected it. And what he uncovered is a truth so uncomfortable that most people refuse to face it even today. Morality alone is not enough. In fact, in the brutal arena of power, morality without strategy is dangerous. But because it makes you predictable, it makes you vulnerable, it makes you easy to defeat. Let's be clear, Machiavelli did not reject morality. He simply refused to worship it. He saw that people who cling to virtue as their only armor often become martyrs, not leaders. They play by rules that no longer apply while others rewrite the game in real time. And here lies the core of his forbidden intelligence trick. You must learn to wear the cloak of morality, but never forget to carry the blade of realism underneath. If you only have one or the other, you will either be corrupted or crushed. But if you have both, and you know when to use each, you become untouchable. Think about this. History is filled with good people who were destroyed by their own principles, idealists who refused to bend, leaders who told the truth too soon, reformers who underestimated the resistance of the status quo. And while their names are honored, their movements often died with them. Now contrast that with those who wore the mask of virtue while maneuvering with ruthless precision. They survived. They led. They shaped history. Why? Because they understood that power does not operate in a vacuum of ideals. It operates in a battlefield of human instincts, shifting loyalties, and hidden agendas. And the ones who thrive are those who can speak the language of both the soul and the sword. Let me ask you something that might sting. Have you ever lost not because you were wrong, but because you were too honest, too moral, too unwilling to play the game everyone else was playing behind the scenes? If so, then you've already tasted the truth Machiavelli tried to warn us about. The world doesn't reward virtue unless it's packaged properly, unless it's strategic. And that's the cloak, the ability to present yourself as noble, trustworthy, and principled, while staying grounded in the reality that people will betray, deceive, and manipulate if it suits them. Machiavelli's intelligence trick is not a license to be evil, but it's a challenge to be wise, to stop seeing morality as a shield and start seeing it as a tool. Because in the wrong hands, even the highest ideals can be used against you. Your honesty can be weaponized. Your kindness can be exploited. Your loyalty can be turned into leverage. The only protection is awareness, and awareness requires the courage to see the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. This is why Machiavelli admired leaders who could be both lion and fox. The lion has strength, presence, and courage, but the fox has cunning, adaptability, and foresight. A lion alone gets hunted by traps. A fox alone gets killed by wolves, but together they form the complete leader. And the cloak and the blade are the modern version of that. The cloak earns trust. The blade earns survival. So what does this mean for you and me? It means we must stop asking, is this good? And start asking, is this effective and good enough to maintain trust? It means we must master nuance, not absolutism. It means we must understand that timing and perception often matter more than intention. That being right too early is the same as being wrong. That sometimes silence is wiser than truth. And that power, when used well, can do more good than purity ever could. We live in a world where perception moves faster than reality, where narratives shape outcomes, where people judge in seconds and remember impressions, not facts. And in that world, morality without strategy is not noble, it's naive. If you want to do good, you must first survive. And survival, in Machiavellian terms, means knowing when to wear the cloak and when to draw the blade. The final move, how to use the forbidden intelligence trick without losing your soul. So now we arrive at the final question, the one Machiavelli never explicitly answered, but the one we must. Can you use the forbidden intelligence trick without becoming the very thing you fear? Can you play the game of power without letting it hollow you out? Can you wield perception, strategy, and realism without losing your integrity, your humanity, your soul? This is the dilemma at the heart of every great leader, every thinker, every person who dares to step beyond the illusions of ordinary morality. Because once you see the machinery behind power, once you understand how easily people are influenced, how often they lie to themselves, how desperately they want to be led. You face a terrifying temptation: complete control. And with control comes the risk of corruption, not just of actions, but of identity. You begin to ask, what if I can get away with it? What if I just bend the truth a little further? What if I stop pretending and just become the mask? Machiavelli's answer in his own life was tragic. He became so closely associated with manipulation that his name itself turned into an insult. Machiavellian came to mean cold, ruthless, calculating. But read him deeply, and you'll find a man who respected power, not worshipped it. A man who believed a ruler should be feared only if he could not be loved. A man who knew that appearances mattered, but who also warned, if your lies are uncovered, you lose everything. So the final move, the true mastery, is not to abandon your soul, but to anchor it, to let strategy serve purpose, not replace it. Here's the path Machiavelli never mapped, but one we must, to use the forbidden intelligence trick not to dominate, but to liberate, not to exploit weakness, but to anticipate it, not to manipulate others, but to understand them so deeply that your influence becomes invisible, natural, even inevitable. That is the highest form of power, the kind that doesn't need to be asserted because it's already internalized by everyone around you. Let me ask you a question that cuts to the core. What is your power for? Not what do you want, but why do you want it? Is it for security, recognition, revenge? Or is it to build, to shape, to protect? Because if you don't know, power will answer for you. And it will always choose the path of least resistance: the ego, the appetite, the shadow. But if you know, if you're clear, then power becomes a tool, not a trap. The intelligence trick becomes a gift, not a curse. This is where the game changes. When your strategy is aligned with something bigger than yourself, you become unshakable. People follow you not just because you're smart or strong or convincing, but because they feel something deeper. They sense clarity. They sense purpose. They sense that your moves are not random, they're principled. And yet, you still play the game better than those who rely only on brute force or blind morality. That's the paradox. The most powerful leaders are not the ones who avoid the dark, they're the ones who've walked through it, studied it, and chosen not to live there. They've mastered the cloak, they've respected the blade, but they've anchored themselves in something higher: vision, meaning, legacy. They lead not because they need followers, but because others need to follow someone who sees the world clearly and still chooses to do what's right. So here's the final reflection: you don't need to be Machiavellian to learn from Machiavelli. You just need the courage to see reality without flinching, and the wisdom to act with intention, not impulse. But you need to be willing to wear the cloak when necessary, to carry the blade when required, but to never forget who you are beneath both. But this is the forbidden intelligence trick: the ability to use truth, illusion, morality, fear, love, power, perception, all as tools in service of something greater than control. Something that endures beyond the strategy. Something that leaves a mark, not just on the world, but on yourself. Because in the end, the real victory is not just gaining power. It's gaining power and still being someone worth following.